Welcome to episode 22 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm going to be talking with Jason Scoggins. Jason runs Spec Scout and publishes the Scoggins Report, which tracks the studio spec screenplay market. So that's coming up. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread the word about the podcast. I want to thank Adriana Bula, Rosanna Catalano, Maria Carasacco, and Benjamin Tucker, who retweeted episode 20 of the podcast. Thank you very much for that. It is greatly appreciated. I want to thank Stephanie Nuri, who gave me a like and left a comment on Facebook. Thank you for that. And I want to thank Stanford Crane, Maria Carasacco, Babs Batella, Rian Martel, and Rydell Napoles, who left me some nice feedback on YouTube. I also want to thank Jason Spellman, who left me a very nice comment on iTunes. It sounds like Jason is having some success putting my marketing strategy into action. This is incredibly rewarding to read these sorts of comments. It's really nice to know that what I'm doing is actually having an impact on people's lives. So thank you, Jason, for that. Jason, if you're listening to this, please drop me an email. I'd love to hear more about how you got this first option. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline inquiry letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. A few quick words about what I'm working on. Nothing really new to report in terms of what's going on with my various scripts. One thing I've been working on is updating my book, Selling Your Screenplay. It needs an update as I wrote it back in 2006. I emailed a bunch of publishers to see if I could find a publisher who might be interested in it. I originally self-published the book back in 2006. It was actually the genesis for this blog and ultimately the podcast. It's kind of what got me started, and the reason I created a blog initially was to promote the book. If anyone out there has any connections in the publishing industry, let me know. I think it's a good book, and I think there is a market for it. One thing that's interesting as I've been emailing publishers, I've had a lot of publishers email me back that they don't necessarily publish this type of book, but they are actually aspiring screenwriters. So I'm thinking there might be some crossover on that front. Maybe there are some aspiring screenwriters out there who are in the publishing world and might be able to help me get this book out there. So if you know anyone or if you're in the publishing world, please do drop me an email. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. Yesterday was actually a really fun day for me. The sci-fi thriller script that I optioned at the beginning of the year was doing some test shoots. It was a very Spartan crew, just the director, the cinematographer, and 3 actors. But it was fun to see some of the scenes come together. The director is very respectful of me and the screenplay, so I'm really hoping that the film gets produced because I think he's going to do a great job with it. In the evening, I went to see a film I wrote called Ninja Apocalypse. It's finally finished, and we had the cast and crew screening of the film last night. This is really what being a screenwriter is all about. Cast and crew screenings are incredibly fun to attend because the audience is so pumped up. Every little joke gets a huge laugh, so it's just a lot of fun to finally see it get onto the big screen. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm talking with Jason Scoggins. As I mentioned earlier, Jason puts out a report called the Scoggins Report, and it tracks the spec market. It's really become sort of the de facto report card on studio spec screenplays. It's a free report. You can actually just check it out, and I'll link to it in the show notes. You can go to his website and sign up for it. I do get it, and I look at it. And it's just good to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what studios are buying what and what sort of spec scripts they're buying. So here's the interview. Welcome, Jason, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So to start out, I wonder if you can give us a quick overview of your career in the entertainment industry and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I don't know how quick it'll be, but I'll give it a shot. So I started out in the business as an assistant at ICM. I was in the television department. I worked for the head of worldwide television at the time. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but within a couple of months, I fell in love with the television business and decided I wanted to be an agent. So I got into the training program at ICM and was at ICM for a couple of years, got promoted a couple of times, and then I left ICM to become an agent at the Gersh Agency. I was there for a couple of years and then went to Writers and Artists. And then I left the business. The siren call of the internet was happening at the time, and a friend invited me to come do business development with him. And that was in 2000, and I started taking one step further and further away from the business over the course of 6 or 7 years. Well, let's call it 7 years. I moved to Park City, started a family, and did a bunch of sales and marketing and tech-related jobs. But then when my daughter was born in 2005, I started thinking about what I really wanted to do with my life, and I kept coming back to the entertainment business in my head and decided I needed to come back and give that another shot. So I had been a TV lit agent previously, and I had sort of the client representation skills. So when I came back, I decided to start a small management business representing screenwriters for feature screenwriters. I still had a day job at the time when I first started, and a good friend of mine had started a management company while I was outside of the business, and he let me build a book of business under his umbrella. And that was a company called Protocol. So in 2007, my timing was perfect. I came back to LA and started doing that, and then the writer's strike happened, and it really shook everything up, as you know, for a couple of years there. So sort of fast forwarding through that period, at the beginning of 2009, I started writing the Scoggins Report, which tracks the Spec market, which we can talk about. And then later that year, I started thinking about ways to make money from entertainment industry data, and I came up with the idea for It's on the Grid, which was a Spec script and open writing assignment and open directing assignment database. So I got that off the ground in the summer of 2009 and launched it that winter, and really started focusing on that in 2010 and sold it to the Wrap in 2011. And then sort of when that ended in 2012, working for the Wrap and It's on the Grid, I did some consulting and then started my current venture, Spec Scout, that fall, and worked on that for 6 months full-time, basically. And then for the last almost a year, I've been working at Baseline, which owns a studio system, and I've been spearheading a new brand integration and product placement database for them. So
now, say that again. They own a studio system. What does that mean? Well,
Baseline is a company that owns a product called Studio System. Studiosystem.com is the website. Okay. It's sort of the super pro version of IMDb Pro. Basically, every agency, studio, network, management company, basically every major company in town has been a client of the company for decades, really. And it's been around since the late 80s. It used to be distributed on CD-ROMs way back in the day, and then transitioned to the web in the mid-90s when the internet started to come up. And so it's really sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the space. Like I said, every major company in town subscribes to it. So about a year ago, they started looking at the idea of building a new product, a brand integration and product placement database. So using the studio system data, but adding opportunities for brands in film, TV, and digital. And they hired me to spearhead that. So that's been my day job, and Spec Scout is still my baby on the side, and my partners and I still push that. And that's the 5-minute version.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So let's dig in a little bit to your years as an agent and then also a literary manager. Sure. I'm sure you got this question a million times. How do I get an agent? That's always what people want to know. I mean, what advice do you have? And maybe there's even some specific examples you could give us of, this is how you found this client, and just some basic, tips. People always want to hear those.
Well, let's see. The place to start is always with recommendations. So the long and the short of it is that most agents and managers that I know really rely on recommendations for their clients from people they trust. So people they trust can be a relatively broad a broad bucket. It could be, their assistant is usually, or colleagues can be sort of the first place, or other agents and managers. So if you're an agent, you rely on recommendations from managers, from producers and executives. There's sort of that sort of core classic set of recommendations. Everybody's looking for great material. Everybody's looking for new clients all the time. People's lists tend to float up and down. So how actively they're looking for new voices to represent can change from month to month or quarter to quarter. But generally speaking, everybody's always looking for that fresh new voice that they can introduce to the marketplace. So recommendations again. But then lately, over the course of the last, I guess, 5 years in particular, some other avenues have sort of fall in that bucket as well. And I'm specifically thinking of screenplay competitions, like the Blacklist, I guess, technically would sort of be in this category, although that's sort of a separate thing that we can talk about in a second. And the Spec Scout would be in that sort of same bucket as the Blacklist. But screenplay competitions like the Nickel or tracking-board.com or trackingbee.com, there's half a dozen to a dozen really good ones. And so agents and managers are looking at those competitions as sources of potential clients as well.
And you literally found, like, just as a breakdown, when you started your own management company, almost all of those people came to you through referrals. People in the business you knew, they would referrals. Did you ever go on to stuff? Was it around stuff like look for Nicole Fellowship winners, look for people on the Blacklist, scripts on the Blacklist?
Absolutely. You're looking. You want to spend your time where it's most valuable, and so there are some screenplay competitions that mean less than, say, the Nickel or the ones that I mentioned. But yeah, I mean, if you have a vested interest in finding new clients in the first place, if you're, especially as I was when I first started out, I was willing to read pretty much anything. And you can tell pretty quickly whether somebody is the real deal or not. And then it comes down to taste, and do I like this person? Can I work with them? All of that stuff is secondary. But yeah, if you're looking for new clients in the first place, then you're willing to look pretty much anywhere. I mean, if you're the guy who washes your car or mows your lawn and says, I know this writer, their stuff is great, you may not sort of value that recommendation or that referral quite as highly. But for the most part, you owe it to yourself if you're in that mode to look everywhere you can. So yeah, you spend a lot of time, you kiss a lot of frogs, so to speak. And
you'll read whatever 3, 5, 10 pages and then make some sort of a decision if it's.
Yeah, I mean, so I tend to read a little bit more than that. I think you can tell within 3 or 5 pages. There's certainly been times where within 1 or 2 or 3 pages, that the writing is simply not competent. But that's usually not what you're faced with. Usually you're sort of looking to see, am I still engaged after 5 pages? Okay, I'll read another 5. And suddenly, if you find yourself on page 30, you sort of cruise to the end. So yes, definitely there's times when you just put something down because it's simply not good enough. And other times it's like I said, a sort of a taste thing.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Blacklist. I mean, obviously it's kind of now forked off. So there's 2 different things, the original Blacklist and then this online service. I mean, the original Blacklist, pretty much all those writers on there were already repped. So as an agent or manager, though, did you somehow try and go after some of those writers and maybe cherry pick them from other agents?
Well, first of all, poaching clients from management company to management company, I think, well, maybe I'm Pollyanna about this, but that tends to happen less than the big agencies going after other agencies' clients. So for the most part, when you're looking at the Blacklist, if somebody has a manager, maybe you note that and sort of keep an eye on the situation. But it says, there's plenty of people who have an agent but not a manager, or vice versa, and so you're looking for opportunities. I firmly believe that if somebody is signed by a manager, then as a manager, it's not worth my time to go after them. If they're looking for a change, then people around them will, make introductions, or there'll be sort of an activity around looking for a new manager. But if you're just sort of trolling for potential opportunity, it's for the most part a waste of time to be focusing on people who currently have representation.
When you talk about getting these scripts through recommendations, just again, this is just a ballpark, casual answer, but what kind of percentage would you say? How many scripts would you, at least read the first 3, 5 pages of before you found one to sign? Just roughly.
Wow.
Are you talking 100, 200?
That's a good question. So I've been in different modes, right? So as a baby agent and as a starting out, baby manager, that's all you have to do, right? If you don't have any clients, then you need to spend all your time looking for potential clients. You have fewer filters for sort of, so you're looking at, you may well look at dozens before you find one that's interesting. That's probably closer to a ratio, like a dozen to 2 dozen, somewhere in there. It also, it's hard to control, right? Because it depends on who's doing the referring, whether that person who is doing the referring, has access to a lot of good material and knows what they're doing. And other times it's somebody who has, I guess just has fewer or less experience. So you never know what you're going to get from a particular source. But I think it's probably fair to say somewhere, I would guess closer to 20 to 1, something like that. Not in the hundreds, because I think if you're reading 100 bad scripts, or let's not say bad. I think what happens is if you're reading something that's good, then it becomes that taste thing and the personal interaction bit. But for the most part, in this sort of realm that we're talking about, you're not really reading hundreds to get to the 1. I think the 100 to 1 ratio is probably closer with query letters, where you really don't know how high the quality is going to be. And for the most part, it's not nearly as strong as something that's being recommended by somebody.
Yeah. So now, I'm actually a writer myself, and I've had agents and managers over the years. I wonder if you can give me some tips, just about what, how to be a good, writer when you have an agent manager. I've found, I had one manager who was excellent at helping me develop material, but had no real ability to get the stuff out there once it was done. And then I think I've had 3 agents over the years, and it was the same thing. They just really didn't get my stuff out there. I was able to do a lot more for myself. And frankly, in all 3 cases, the agents would get annoyed with me because I was so aggressive marketing my own stuff. And they would be telling me, hey, I need to do rewrites on this stuff. And I'd be like, yeah, I'll just keep sending it out. And in 2 of the 3 cases, I actually optioned stuff that they would refuse to send out because they didn't think it was developed enough. So they got annoyed with me and ended up dropping me. So I wonder if you have some tips for writers who have agents, and how can they be good, writers with an agent or a manager? What can they expect from their agent and manager?
Well, so there's a couple of questions there. How do you be a good client is one. How do you find a good rep is a separate one. And then how do you help, if that's the right word, how do you help promote yourself and build your own career in tandem with your representatives? I think to take those in order, I think finding or being a good client really boils down to being professional. So you hear, in fact, I've been this manager who's been irritated with a client who is not acting in what I saw was a professional manner with how they interacted and sort of the norms of the industry. There's certain rhythms and stuff you do and don't do, things you say and don't say. So if you have a client that doesn't get it, I guess is sort of the shorthand for that, then that can be very irritating. But I would say that for the most part, if you're just professional about it and are taking your career seriously, and are also taking your relationship with your rep seriously, then yeah, there'll be times when your agent or manager doesn't get back to you on the phone or doesn't respond to email quickly enough. I think there is a level of intensity that writers can bring to the mix where they're really expecting a certain level of activity. And so that'll get to the second piece about how to interact and how to find a good agent or have a satisfying relationship with them. I'll touch on that in a second. But just to sort of wrap this first part off, really being a good client boils down to being professional and being persistent. So if you're not getting your phone call returned, then lob another call in, and not like 2 hours later, maybe not even the next day. I think have reasonable expectations for a turnaround time. And there's a difference between, hey, I sent you my script this morning, I really, what do you think of it? And you're calling in the afternoon. That's probably unrealistic. But if you send a new piece of material in on a Thursday, say, there's probably a reasonable expectation to have it read by the following Monday and be able to start thinking about what shape it's in and what comes next. I think how to find a good agent in the same context. let me sort of reframe the question. I think how to have a satisfying relationship with your rep, whether it's an agent or a manager, kind of boils down to setting expectations. So what I would do as a manager is I would set expectations for all of the stuff we're talking about here, of what sort of a turnaround time they can expect. And I was always sort of pretty upfront with how many other clients I had. So if I had only a few, then the turnaround time would be much shorter. But as my client list grew and the demands of my time grew, then I sort of had to reset the stage for how long it would take for me to return a phone call or return an email. There's generally an expectation of a return call within 24 hours. And that's as much about managing the writer's nervousness, particularly when you're going out with a piece of material. But really this sort of boils down to, at the beginning of the relationship, just really set your expectations on both sides. So it's up to the rep to do that as well as the writer. And if the expectations aren't aligned, then maybe it's not going to be a good fit, and should consider sort of either moving on or not jumping into that relationship. And I've already sort of lost track of the third piece. About pushing your own career. It's really about working in tandem. I think where I would get irritated as a manager or an agent when I felt like the writer or my client wasn't, I don't even need to say unprofessional in this context. If really it sort of boils down to if I'm the rep, if I'm the agent or the manager, I'm in charge of the strategy and I'm in charge of executing the strategy. And I really don't want the client to be going around the strategy or sort of undermining it with a bunch of extra activity. Now, that's not to say that you don't reach out to people that you know. That's not to say that you don't sort of put yourself up for opportunities when they arise. But I think keeping your communication wide open with your rep is really important in order to make sure that you are pushing your career just as hard as your rep is. Mm-hmm.
For sure. Okay. Well, thank you on that. So let's move into the spec market. I think I first heard about you years ago. Scott Meyer with his blog, he republishes a lot of the Scoggins Report stuff. Sure. So that's where I first started seeing these spec script sales. So let's just talk about the Scoggins Report for a minute. First off, how do you collect that data? I've always been curious how you get it. I mean, it's not anything that's really available. It seems like it's just a bunch of calls to the studios and calls to your contacts and trying to build it up.
Well, yeah. Well, when I first started it was a little bit easier. You're right that it's not publicly available, although it's not like it's private either. This information is more, the phrase I use is it's not widely distributed. It's not like you can just Google spec script and have the latest happenings of the spec market there. But when I was starting, there were more and more active tracking boards of basically groups of people whose job, or sort of not job, but their hobby was tracking the spec market and sharing information amongst themselves. And so I really relied on that quite a bit at the outset as I was sort of building, the newsletter up into what it is today. And really since the first couple of years, as I started doing that, and as you say, sort of it became a thing, I'm getting incoming calls and emails from people saying, hey, I'm out with a piece of material, or I just set something up. I'm getting that information on an incoming basis way more than I did when I first started. So these days it's a combination of the trades. So spec sales tend to get reported fairly well. So the trades, and just sort of keeping an eye on the tracking boards that are out there, and then also relying on incoming calls and emails. And then occasionally I'll send an email out. For example, if someone's out with a spec by a writer who has sold specs before, then it might, it's probably realistic that at some point there'll be some activity around it and it'll get set up. And occasionally I'll send an email out and just follow up and see if there's anything going on with a piece of material. And sometimes the answer is yes, and they just haven't announced it yet. So that's the other way. It's outbound calls and emails as well.
I mean, it seems like there's an incentive for the agents to, with failure especially, to hide. I mean, if they send a client out to pitch and it goes nowhere, or they send a spec out, even just, it seems there's an incentive for them to not own up to that if it doesn't hit. And it seems like your numbers actually count how many went out, not just how many sold.
That's true. Although, there's really not a huge stigma around. Well, within reason, within the context of what we're talking about right here, there's not a huge stigma around I took a piece of material out and it didn't sell, because you can't really control whether something's going to resonate with everybody in town or even with enough people to sort of generate the momentum and heat around it that will result in a sale. These days, and in fact, this has always been true, I think you take a spec out as often to introduce the writer or reintroduce the writer through a piece of material, as much that as it is to sell that piece of material. And the first choice always is, let's sell this. The second choice is, if you get a dozen people who read it and love it, they want to have a meeting to sort of reintroduce or introduce themselves to that writer and then talk about projects to work on. That's a win in and of itself as well. There is less material going out to the market now than there was 5 years ago or so, and I think that is more. And I actually, with the intro to the Scoggins report not that long ago, I think it was last week, talked about this dynamic of less material going out wide, less material in general just getting taken to the marketplace. Partly because the business has changed. The studios are buying fewer scripts than they used to, and their expectations of the status of that project when it comes in the door has changed. So they're looking for a director to be attached, a star to be attached, or at least a producer to be attached that they know that they can rely on to deliver that piece of material. And they're also looking for the material to be much further down the pike of development than it used to. So a decade ago, they would buy a piece of material that they might throw out everything but the premise and start from scratch. These days, they are not spending money on those kinds of projects. They really are looking for material that they intend to make with basically a polish.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a quick step back, just in case people don't quite understand sort of the gist of what you're talking about. Define like what this means to go wide. I mean, what exactly is that? And I mean, you go down to AFM and there's 1,000 movies out there. Those are not the movies you're tracking. Yeah. So let's just define that for people so they understand exactly what you're talking about.
Sure. Well, in a nutshell, when I say the phrase go wide, that means I want this piece of material to be seen by everybody in town simultaneously. And by everybody, the initial sort of set of emails and phone calls that you make is to producers. What you're looking for at the outset is a champion who's going to take a piece of material into a studio who will buy that piece of material for that producer to produce. Some writers or some agents, you might be positioned to go straight to the buyers themselves. But I think what you're seeing more and more of is material getting packaged up. So anyway, the idea is you want everybody in town to see the piece of material at the same time. And the idea there is you create some urgency around turnaround time. You expect people to read it fairly quickly, and either to pass and give you a quick, this isn't for us, so that you can focus your energies elsewhere, or to say, I really want this, please please allow me to take this into a particular territory and let me have that exclusively. And to unpack that a piece, that word territory really refers to buyers. And by buyers, I mean both the studios who are literally writing a check for the material. It could be non-studio buyers, so companies with production money that or production financing. So if they bought the material, they could go make that movie. That's what I mean by territories. So a producer might read it and love it and say, hey, my overall deal is at Sony, and I've got these great relationships at Relativity and Legendary and Universal. So I want all of those territories. And then you as the rep, your job is to sort of figure out strategically which producer should have each territory, such that you could create a bidding war between the multiple buyers. Mm-hmm. And sort of part of that strategy at the outset. You're not going to call 15 different producers that have an overall deal at Sony, for example. You're going to pick one and maybe have a backup in case that one passes. And you're sort of trying to figure out the right producer for a piece of material before you go out there. Otherwise, you're wasting a lot of people's time, and nobody appreciates that.
Sure. So now let's ask the obvious question is, how do you get yourself as a screenwriter into a position that your script goes wide and sort of gets in this pool of, top level, studio level scripts?
Well, really the only thing you can do as a writer is to write a great piece of material, because this whole marketplace that I'm describing, first of all, it's not an actual marketplace. It's not like there's a NASDAQ for spec scripts. That would be great if that existed. And if somebody out there is developing that, I'd love to talk to them, because I think there's interesting sort of possibilities there. But that's not the way the business works right now. The way it works now is agents and certain managers, not every manager is sort of positioned to do this, but some are. But mostly agents take the material out, and they put together a strategy that either includes going wide, or you might slip it to half a dozen people, and either just to sort of get some feedback to see if it's ready for public consumption, so to speak, or some combination thereof. You might even say, I know that this is only right for 5 different buyers, so let's put a strategy together that just goes one by one, and let's give that company a week to take a look, and if they don't respond, then we'll move to the next one. There's lots of different ways to approach this. But as the writer, this is not something the writer can do. For the most part, buyers are not even going to, they'll take a phone call or an email from somebody they know, but for the most part, what they're looking for is that buffer that the agent or manager represents. And so it's really about the agent and manager taking the material out. So as a writer, all you can do is write a great piece of material.
And we answered that at the beginning of the podcast. We said, how do you get an agent? So the first step is to do that networking and lay that groundwork.
Right.
So let's talk just about sort of some specifics. You've been doing this now, I guess, since 2009, really following the spec market. So are you seeing any trends? Are there any trends that are changing? Are there any trends that have been constant over the last 5 years? Any tips? And again, it's sellingyourscreenplay.com. So the audience is screenwriters. Do you have any tips what they should potentially be writing? Anything like that?
Well, let's see. So trends wise, and this is not some special thing related to the Scoggins report per se, but if you're looking at what the studios are doing, and I think it's important to have a sense of what the marketplace is doing, like in general, what movies are getting made and who's making them and how many. And so from a trends perspective, the studios have been producing and releasing far fewer movies than they used to, on the order of a third fewer. So where they used to release 150 or 160 movies themselves, now it's down in the 100 to 110 to 120. So they're making fewer
And that's
movies.
a 5-year period. That's over the course of the last 5 years. It's about a third less.
Yeah, and it's been consistently down between 100 and, I don't know the actual number, I'd have to look at it, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 and 120 movies across the major and mini studios. So they're making fewer movies, and for the most part, what they're looking for is stuff that has an opportunity to make $1 billion, for lack of a better, not to put too fine a point on it. So what movies make $1 billion? Where there aren't that many. There are giant studio tentpole size movies, and so that's action and thriller and a few comedies here and there. I don't think we've seen I can't think of $1 billion comedy, but you can still make a relatively handsome profit on a movie that costs $40 or $50 million, and so that's even a studio comedy could be in that realm. But really, from a trend perspective, they're really looking for stuff that can travel, which is to say that will be successful abroad. So that also is another reason that action and thrillers tend to be the first stop when buyers are looking for new material. Now, all that said, if your voice or sort of your talent really takes you in the direction of smaller movies, of dramas, that's not to say that there aren't opportunities there as well. You just sort of have to know what you're in for. It also, as a rep, it sort of it changes the texture. Like when you get a drama in, for example, you're not going to approach the sales process for that piece of material as you would some big action tentpole. I don't know if I answered the question. I feel like I went a little broad.
Yeah. No, it's a little broad, but I guess just to bring it back a little bit, are there any specific tips? One thing I get from producers, and you're kind of touching on this, is, thrillers, play well overseas. Mm-hmm. They seem to be kind of timeless. One of the things, I'm kind of on the front line of interacting with some screenwriters that, are on the beginning stages of their career. And I get a lot of, Civil War dramas, or my summer at camp, this dramatic summer at camp piece, and I look at it, I think, and the thing is, people always point to these Sundance movies, or these movies that were successful,
Sure.
and there are those movies out there, but there's not many of them, and they're really tough sells. So, is there any advice just in terms of sort of what specs are best for new writers to write?
I've never been an advocate of writing to the market. So the first thing I always say, and I think this is still true, is that you have to write the script that you have to write. I just think that it's important to have a realistic sense of the marketplace. So if you're writing a Civil War drama, or some small movie, and by small I mean contained and without broad appeal, broadly speaking. You have to have realistic expectations about what you can do with that piece of material. Now, if it's a fantastic piece of writing, people are going to read it and go, wow, man, I got to meet this girl or meet this guy who wrote this piece of material. But chances of it getting sold for a bunch of money is fairly slim. And then whether that movie will ever get made is also, as much of a crapshoot or more of a crapshoot than the normal crapshoot that getting a movie made is at all. So basically my advice is just walk into any piece of material or any new script that you're writing with your eyes wide open. And I'm not saying, I definitely don't think that you should only write super broad commercial appeal projects. But if you're only going to write the sort of quirky stuff that not everybody is going to want to see, then just have realistic expectations about how far you can get with those samples.
Mm-hmm. So you just released the pitch scorecard, and I'm curious if you notice a lot of differences between pitch sales versus spec sales, in terms of genre, just in terms of really any differences that you might see, and has it changed over the years? Do they kind of correlate each other, or are they different?
That's a really good question. So sorry for looking off screen here. I've got them up on my other monitor here. So what I was interested to see about pitch sales is how few thrillers so far have sold this year. I'm looking at so far for the first 4 months of 2014. There's only been one thriller pitch sold. Now, and interestingly, also on the spec side, there's only been 3 that have sold this year. Usually, thrillers are up there with action adventure on the spec side. Last year, there were 32 action and adventure specs and 34 thrillers. Those are the top 2 genres. Whereas over on the pitch side, comedy tends to be the top genre. And so I'm not 100% sure exactly where that lies, like why comedy pitches tend to sell as a group better than comedy specs. One reason is probably how difficult it is to write a good comedy script, and it's either working or it's not on the page. Whereas with a pitch, you have the promise of something super funny and great, and whether it pans out or not, at least you're relying on hopes and dreams at the time. A writer who has a track record for funny material comes in and pitches you his or her next hilarious idea. That's really the one that jumps out at me. I mean, the difference between pitches and specs in terms of genre really is that comedies tend to be the strongest genre for pitches, whereas action and thriller are the strongest ones for specs.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure I already know the answer to this question, but I figured I would ask it anyways. How do you get yourself into a position that you're pitching to the major studios?
You write a script that turns into a giant success. It really is what's your box office track record. From time to time, there are outliers, so it could be an amazingly effective agent or manager. It could be a piece of material that didn't sell, but that got you a round of 40 or 50 general meetings, and and you have a piece of material or a project that you want to work on that you pitch in the room, or you have a general meeting and they say, come back and pitch us your next thing, and you take advantage of that opportunity. For the most part, though, the people that are selling pitches have a track record of success. It really is how much money has your last movie made.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive in a little bit to SpecScout.com and talk about that, and really tell us kind of maybe the 2-minute elevator pitch for what it is, and then tell us how we can best use it as screenwriters.
Sure. Well, why don't I start with what I was trying to do? So I partnered up with a couple of guys a couple of years ago, and my original idea was I thought it would be great to have a scoring system for screenplays so that you could compare material by professional writers, the stuff that goes out to the spec market, for example, with material by aspiring writers, so that you would have a handy way to tell whether an aspiring writer's material is strong enough to warrant somebody's time. It was really about the idea of there's lots of bad material that goes to market, and there's lots of bad material that is looking for a home, but shouldn't be. There's a lot of sort of noise in the system. So that was sort of the core idea. And what my partners and I came up with for Spec Scout was a website that combines a coverage library, so screenplay coverage, that has a scoring system, that it's a 100-point scale, where we're covering the spec market, doing coverage of the scripts that hit the market so that we have that bank of sort of a baseline of what's good and what's not so good. And then also we provide that coverage service for screenwriters, and the good material we're putting in the coverage library alongside the material that goes to market. So at its core, the service we're providing for a fee is the coverage service. So we have 3 readers read every piece of material, and their scores are put together, and that's how we can credibly say that the material that's above a certain score, compares favorably with that from the pros.
And is the process the same for the? I just was on your website, and Will Ferrell is doing, and Adam McKay are doing something. Is like, so that does that piece of material go through the same process? So the people that are reading it are blind to the fact that Will Ferrell is attached as a producer to that. They read it, and so the scores really are apples to apples.
That's right.
And there's no extenuating sort of things that influence the reader. It's just the material.
That's right. So what the readers can see is the cover page of the screenplay. So and let me actually sort of take one step back and make sure that I'm not misconstruing this. So for the Scoggins report, I'm tracking the spec market. So I know what is getting taken to market and what is selling. We put that information in Spec Scout, and then when we can get our hands on those scripts, which is it's about 2/3 of the time, eventually that script will be available. We'll grab that, and our readers will cover it, and we'll come up with a score. Now, this gets to what you were asking. They don't know who the attachments were. They can see the cover page, but most of the time the cover page is just the title and the writer's name, the producers that were attached at the outset, and then maybe a phone number or something for the agent. So they know that it's a pro script. They don't know anything else about it. And most of our readers aren't tracking the market like this. Like, they could, if they wanted to, like, pay very close attention to the Scoggins report and know that when I'm in Love with the DJ sells and then they see the script is up there and they grab that, they might know a little bit about it. But for the most part, no, it's pretty blind. And they apply the same rubric to those scripts as they do to our writer clients. And that's really the key thing. The lens through which they're looking, how they're thinking about this particular screenplay is the same from a pro script to an aspiring pro script.
And I'm curious, do agents or managers, if you guys, a script is getting some momentum in the marketplace and then you guys give it a less than stellar review, have you had some nasty calls from agents and managers?
We worried about that, but practically speaking, we're not grabbing the script that early. It takes a certain amount of time to turn it around as well. So practically speaking, there's no scenario where we're getting in the way of somebody's business at all. So we're tracking it, and the fact that it's in the marketplace is available on Spec Scout, but we don't have any coverage of it in any time frame that would make a difference. Now later, though, like the high scoring scripts are something that, like, pretty often, most of the time, scripts don't sell, right? So a high scoring script might catch someone's attention later if they're looking for a comedy or whatever. They can go. Our industry pro subscribers go through and sort of take a look at what is still available. We continue to track stuff after it's been on the market. So if anything, we can help as opposed to hinder.
Okay. Well, let's talk then specifically about, exactly what you offer. So there's a fee, and then 3 readers read it, and then you get into this library. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So again, yes, the key thing is that we have 3 readers read every script. And the idea, remember, the core sort of mission is to come up with this score. And what we were trying to avoid, or one thing that I have long known, everybody who knows anything about coverage knows that one person's opinion is simply that. And that, practically speaking, when you take a piece of material to market, you might think it's fantastic. You were talking earlier about material that your reps think need more help. Well, that's just one person or a couple of people's opinion. And as you have discovered yourself, other people have a completely different opinion. They might think it's great as is, or yes, it needs a polish, but let's go ahead and I'll buy it and we can work on it. And so as a manager, and also as a TV agent, the subjective nature of one person's opinion is what you're battling almost all the time. And what we're trying to do is come up with some objectivity and sort of come up with a way to have subjectivity be a factor, because you can't remove it, but at least, minimize it as much as you can. And so the approach we took was to have multiple people read the script. We tested having 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people read it to see what would happen with the scores, and this magic number is 3. And so that's what we've gone with. So for the price is $197. So if all you're looking for is feedback from one person on a piece of material to get a sense of what one person thinks about it, and you can get that for 50 or 60 or $75, that's perfectly great. What we're trying to do is give you sort of a mini wisdom of the crowd assessment of the script, have multiple people read it, again, with the same rubric, so that you can, if there's something wrong with the script and all three people are noting that same thing, then that's probably something that you should look at for the next draft. The idea is to give as useful a set of feedback as we possibly can. And so to sort of take it to the next step, which you also alluded to, the scripts that score above a certain threshold, and it turns out that 68 on our 100-point scale is sort of the average of spec market material. So for our writer clients, if their script scores a 68 or better, we let them put their material or the coverage of their material in the coverage library alongside the spec market stuff. And we tag it and we sort of promote it to my mailing list, the Scoggins Report mailing list. In fact, I was working on one before we jumped on the call today. The couple of scripts from April that scored high enough, I'm going to blast out to my mailing list. We put it on the home page of the site as well. So we're promoting it to our industry subscribers. And then a couple of other advantages then are, as a writer with a piece of material that we've included, we call them our scouted writers. You can create a little mini profile so that if someone clicks on your name on the site, they can sort of see who you are and what you're about, whether you're repped, and how to get a hold of you. And then you can also upload other material that we haven't covered and have it be there as well, so that if somebody's interested in a piece of material by you already, they can see what else you've read and download that material as well.
Do you have agents, managers, producers coming to your site and going through this database?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And mostly agents, mostly producers. Is there any break on that?
That's a good question. I haven't analyzed it like that. It's probably in the neighborhood of 50 or 60% on the producer and executive side, and 30 to maybe 40%-ish on the agent and manager side. Of the 60 or so, well, it's going to be 62 scripts that we put on the site. These scouted scripts. 6 of them have gotten offers from producers. I think a couple of them have gotten set up, and a couple of them have sort of said, no, I want to, they basically have said no to the option offers that they've gotten. We've only been doing this for about a year, so we'll be continuing to promote those success stories. But it is agents and managers and producers and executives.
And you mentioned this 68 is kind of the benchmark. Do you, off the top of your head, know what percentage of the scripts that are submitted actually get above that 68?
It's pretty low. It's probably in the neighborhood of somewhere between 10 and 15%. I mean, it's one of those things where we can't really control the quality of the material that's getting submitted, which isn't a knock on it. I mean, it is what it is. The whole purpose of this is to provide the feedback and let people know what, oftentimes we'll get a first draft and they just want to get a sense of what people think and where to focus their efforts for their rewrite.
Mm-hmm. And how detailed are the notes that the readers bring back? 1 page, 3 page?
Each reader provides roughly 3 pages of notes. So
Okay.
To be more specific, what they do is the 3 readers collaborate on a synopsis. So not each of them is not always writing a synopsis from scratch. The first person always has to, but we have a way to make that not very onerous. And then they're providing comments on 10 specific aspects of the script, plus sort of an overall, what did I think of the script in general. Each of those 10 categories gets a full paragraph, and the readers are required to support any of their opinions with references to the script itself. So if they think the dialogue is weak for whatever reason, they need to be very specific about why they felt that. And that's a little less concrete than, for example, references to spelling errors and grammar and punctuation and format. That's much easier, and the readers are required to have page citations to the stuff that they notice. So each of the readers, it ends up being about 3 pages per reader. So the whole package ends up being between 9 and 10 pages.
Perfect. Can you talk a little bit about who these readers are? What is their experience typically?
Yeah, they all have some level of experience prior to working for us. We put them through sort of a 20-week. Well, it's more like a 20 script program. Like the crucial thing about the product that we're providing for a fee to our clients is that we want the it to be very, very consistent. And so training our readers to be able to do exactly what we want them to do the way we want them to do it takes somewhere between a dozen and 24 scripts before we're ready to put them in the mix and have them write coverage for our clients.
Mm-hmm. Are there any just sort of general tips, like a lot of mistakes that you see from, I guess these would be general writing tips really, but are there any tips that you have for writers who are thinking of using the service, things that they can clean up or, do to make their chances better?
Well, that's a broad question. We have a whole page on the site. In fact, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and look up the URL so that I've got it. So the website's called specscout.com, and then in the top of the page there's a big score button. So if you click the score button, we're answering that question in great detail. So each of the 10 categories that we take a look at are listed there, along with the questions that we ask our readers to ask. And so by extension, writers themselves should be asking themselves that same question about their characters, about conflict, about the dialogue and logic, the originality and pacing, all of the sort of main things that you're looking for, that any professional is looking for in a script. That's what our readers are assessing, and the questions that we force our readers to ask are sort of enumerated there.
Perfect. So I can link to that stuff in the show notes. You've been very generous with your time. I really do appreciate it. I wonder if you just want to give a quick, tell us how people can contact you, your Twitter handle, that kind of thing. And again, we'll link to it in the show notes, but just give us a shout out on how people can find you and contact you.
Thanks. So let's see. Let's start with Spec Scout. So specscout.com is the website. We have a Twitter feed that's at Spec Scout. Let's see, I do the Scoggins report, and so you can sign up, and it's free, by the way. It's a weekly thing, and we cover the spec market as well as the pitch market, and we put out one newsletter per week, and that's completely free. To sign up for that, you go to specscout.com/Scoggins report. I think, actually, now that I say that, let me double check before I.
You can send me the link, and I'll put it in the show notes, so we'll get it.
Well, right at the top of that page, there's a box, and get the free weekly Scoggins report. Just put your email in, and we do that. I never do any spam to that mailing list at all, so there's zero risk there. And then my personal Twitter feed is at @jscoggins, JSCOGGINS, and that's pretty much me.
Perfect. So, well, Jason, as I said, you've been very generous with your time. This has been very informative. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick plug for my email and fax blast query letter service. Just in the last year, I've optioned 4 scripts, sold 1 script, and got 1 paid writing assignment. And all of this came from using my own email and fax blast query service. Here's how it works. First, you join SYS Select. Then you post your logline and query letter in the SYS Select forum. I review your logline and query letter and help you make them as good as they can be. Then you purchase the blast and I send it out for you. It's really that simple. The emails are sent as if they're from your email address, so all replies go directly back to you. You can exclude companies if there are specific companies you don't want to send to. Check out www.sellingyourscreenplayselect.com to learn more about this and all the other SYS Select services. In the next episode, I'm going to be interviewing director Jennifer Steinman. She recently directed her second feature film. She was involved with the whole process, raising the money, shooting the film, and then in marketing and distributing it. And she's very open about how each part of the process worked for her. So if you're someone who thinks they might like to shoot their own script, you'll definitely want to check this out. In today's Writing's Words section, I want to talk a bit about Jason's site, Spec Scout. Right after I did the interview with him, I submitted my limited location horror thriller script to it. I did not mention this to Jason. I paid full price, and I have no reason to think he gave me any sort of preferential treatment. My script received a score of 55, so it's a long ways from the 68 it needs to get a recommend from him. One thing I'll say, though, is that the notes that they supplied were pretty good. There was some consensus on some of the issues, and they even listed a bunch of typos. So if you're looking for notes, it's about the cheapest way you're going to get 3 readers to read your material. I haven't found that the notes from the blacklist readers are particularly useful. So if you don't get a good score on the blacklist, there's really not much value to it. But with Spec Scout, I think the notes are worth the price. So even if you don't get a good score, at least you can potentially improve the script. If you really need a deep dive into your screenplay, though, I would recommend going directly to a script consultant. I actually have several listed on my site at sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. But if you're looking to get some good notes from 3 sources, this is probably the cheapest, quickest way to do it. So definitely check that out if you want notes on your script. One thing I would like to point out, I haven't been getting great scores on this new horror thriller script, but I still believe in it, so I'm still aggressively marketing it. I really feel like I've written this script to be produced. It's so simple with just one main location and only six actors that I think I'll eventually find a producer who likes it. The script I sold last November, I wrote in 1998, so it literally took me 15 years to sell it. And trust me, there were more than a few people who didn't think this script was ready. And you know what? They might have been right too, but I didn't think so. And I just kept pushing it and I eventually sold it. Mark my words, it may take me 15 years or longer to sell this latest horror thriller script, but I will sell it. I know the markets that the producers I deal with are working in, and this script has been written with that in mind. My main point to telling you all of this is that you shouldn't give up just because you're getting a few rejections. It only takes one yes. If you really feel like your script is ready, you've got to just keep marketing it. So good luck and wish me luck too. That's the show. Thank you for listening.